Hi everybody, I'm Chase Sanborn. On this channel I share things I've learned in more than 40 years as a professional jazz trumpet player. I post videos on brass playing, jazz improvisation, and the business of being a musician. While most of my videos are instructional, this one is informational, based on my personal experience of contracting Bell's palsy 20 years ago. During the days and the weeks and the months of my recovery, I kept a detailed blog of my symptoms and progress. Over the past 20 years, I've shared that with a lot of people, mostly brass players. Bell's palsy doesn't only affect brass players, and it doesn't result from brass playing, but its effects are uniquely disruptive to us. It's like it was made to destroy our ability to play the instrument. This video is based on what I wrote in the blog. Now, I'm going to preface by saying that I've been planning to make this video for some time, but in this moment, when we're all harboring dark thoughts and fears in the midst of a worldwide pandemic, my thoughts go to another time of dark thoughts and fears. I'm not trying to equate my experience with a cataclysm that affects the entire human population. Bell's palsy is not life-threatening, and the world economic system was not in danger of collapsing. My own personal economic system, though, was threatened, with a very real possibility that it could end my career. Now, as it turned out, that didn't happen. But musicians today, like many others, are facing financial devastation along with fears for our health. About the only positive thing I can say about the current situation is that we're all going through it together, the entire world, at the same time. One hopes that maybe some good might eventually come from a shared traumatic experience. And likewise, I hope that some good can come from me sharing this story. And I look forward to the day that I can repost this video without this preface. Bell's palsy affects the 7th cranial nerve, which sends messages from the brain to the muscles of the face. As far as I know, the medical profession still doesn't know for sure what causes it, but the assumption is that it's a viral infection which causes the nerve to swell. That blocks transmission from the brain, and the result is partial or total paralysis on one side of the face. The conditions can range from mild to severe. I think if I wasn't a trumpet player, I would have called it a 2 to 3 week event, because most of the major symptoms had abated by then. But the disruption to my ability to play the instrument lasted a lot longer. The very first symptom was something I didn't pay any attention to, but I learned later it's a red flag. My tongue felt desensitized, as if I had scalded it with hot coffee. The next day, when I woke up after a hard-blowing gig the night before, my chops were pretty stiff and unresponsive. But as any trumpet player knows, that's not all that unusual. I did a gentle warm-up, and I put my horn away until the gig that night. As soon as I started to play the gig, I knew that something was wrong. I couldn't play anything above the staff when I'd normally have a range up to about an octave above that. In the course of 4 hours, my range continued to fall to about a C in the middle of the staff. If I tried to play anything higher than that, the air just leaked out of my mouth. I was taking parts down 2 octaves, but the band was so loud that it was hardly noticeable. Now, I also had a slight twitch in my eye, but I didn't connect it at the time. Honestly, I wasn't all that worried. It seemed more comical to me than anything. I just assumed that maybe I had strained the muscles and a bit of rest would take care of it. I had a day off the next day, so I didn't take the horn out, but over the course of the day, my jaw started to ache, and by the end of the day, one whole side of my face was numb, and I couldn't close my eye all the way. Now, I should have gone to the hospital right then, but I decided to wait until the next day so I could see my own doctor. As a sad side note, the next morning I was scheduled to visit a friend who was in the final stage of cancer, so I did that before I went to the medical clinic. Now, looking at him, still relatively young but with only a short time left to live, I felt tremendously guilty, distracted with worry about my chops. As it turned out, that was the last time I saw him, so that moment is burned in my memory. My doctor was able to diagnose Bell's palsy very quickly. She warned me that it might be a very slow recovery and that I could be left with a permanent droop on one side of my face. I remember her asking me if I was all right because my face had gone white with the realization that this could spell the end of my playing career. She prescribed steroids and physical therapy. Although I was a day late in getting to the doctor, I think the steroids still had time to take a significant effect. In talking to others over the years who've been left with permanent after effects, a common thread is delay in getting on steroids. Now, compared to some, my case was not that severe. I didn't have a lot of facial distortion, and the main visual indicator was that I couldn't close my eye all the way when I blinked, so I had to keep it closed with a patch. My face, though, felt like it was shot up with Novocaine. Brushing my teeth was sort of comical because the water would just come spilling out of my mouth. Physical therapy consisted of hooking up electrodes to my face to stimulate muscle contraction. I eventually rented one of the machines so that I could do it at home. The electricity would contract the muscles for about 20 seconds and then release. Whenever the current came on, I'd watch in a mirror and try to form a balanced embouchure. It's a hard thing to get your head around the fact that the muscles are still there, you just can't get the message from the brain through to them. I actually became almost addicted to the treatments as a psychological boost. Now, as far as the trumpet, I couldn't make a sound at first. With no muscle control on one side, there's no way to form the lips into a vibrating medium, and all the air just leaked out of the corner. By the end of the first week, I could produce a very weak buzz if I held together that side of my mouth with my fingers. I also found that I could get some sort of a buzz out of a tuba mouthpiece, especially if I stuck it in the large end of a trumpet lead pipe. I carried that around with me all day, and I called it my recuperator. My poor son, ironically named Cooper, had to listen to that for 8 hours in the car on the way to a family cottage. During the second week, I'd wake up every morning with my face numb, and then that would abate during the course of the day. By the end of the week, I could actually produce notes on the trumpet over a 2-octave range if I held together the corner of my embouchure. I could play a single note without my fingers for about 5 to 10 seconds before the embouchure gave way. I'd rest for a few minutes, and then I'd do that again, over and over. I called them my short long tones. During the third week, most of the physical symptoms were starting to go away. The numbness was gone and my eye would close. I was happy to see that progress, but it had its own kind of frustration in that I was starting to feel almost normal in general terms, but my ability to play the horn was still so compromised. It felt like that one thing had been surgically removed, and it created a real question in my mind whether I'd ever get back everything I'd lost. I had to try and keep my focus on slow but steady progress. I got to where I could produce a clear tone over the range of a fifth from low C to G, and every couple of days I'd get another half step higher. I wrote in my log that within my very limited range, I was able to do pretty much everything, although I couldn't play for very long before I needed to rest. I continued to teach students throughout this time, and it was a revelation not to be able to demonstrate. I realized that in some ways that's actually a cheat for both student and teacher. If I explain something and then I demonstrate it, both of us may feel that the message has been received, but a student won't really grasp it until they do it themselves. I will say that the students seemed to revel in their newfound ability to outplay the teacher. By the end of the fourth week, my range was actually up to a high C, although the sound was very thin. It felt like the progress was 3 steps forward and 2 steps backward. It was always worse in the morning than at the end of the previous day. That was a test of patience and optimism. In the fifth week, I had a decision to make. I had canceled all my gigs up to that point, but I was still booked to play a concert with my quartet at a jazz festival the following week. I'd kept that one on the books as a mental target, and the band was prepared to play the gig without me. Now, frankly, I was scared. Having not played outside my practice room all that time, I really had no idea what my capabilities were on a gig, and I was leery about people hearing me in a compromised state. In the end, I played the gig. It was only an hour and it went okay, although I remember thinking at the time that I couldn't have made it through one more tune. I let the audience in on what I'd been going through and the significance of this gig as a return to action. Well, that engendered a lot of empathy, and the applause at the end was heartfelt and very much appreciated. Playing that first gig was a psychological milestone, and it gave me the courage to try playing one with a wedding band. Now, I was pretty sure that I was not going to be able to make it through a 5-hour gig, but my friends in the band would have understood. However, to my surprise and delight, I not only made it all the way through, but I was actually able to play notes that I hadn't been able to hit in the practice room. I think it's like someone with a broken leg who's afraid to give up the crutches and then one day discovers that he's actually able to walk. Well, that experience gave me hope, really for the first time, that I was on the road to full recovery, and it gave me the confidence to start accepting gigs again, although I was still cautious about what I committed to. I was particularly nervous about recording sessions because you generally don't know what you're walking into, and you're very much under a microscope. On the first session that I played, there were other trumpets, so I didn't have to worry about high notes, but they did ask me to stay and overdub a solo. Now, I would have panicked at the thought of that a couple of weeks before, but it went okay. That was another significant milestone. So at this point, about 2 months in, I was telling people that I felt fully recovered. Truthfully, though, I didn't feel that way. Every day was like a bad day. I couldn't just place the trumpet on my lips and assume that things would work. I had to be very careful and focused about every action. In all, it took a full year before I finally got to the point where I felt that I was able to play as well or better than before it happened. So what did I take away from the experience? The most immediate impact was a sudden loss of income at a time when I had a young family to support, and that weighed heavily on me, especially considering that I didn't know when or if I would recover completely. There was the philosophical question of who am I if I'm no longer a trumpet player? Now, ultimately, I didn't have to answer that question, and I still don't know the answer. Physically, I did wind up as a better player. Having it all taken away and then doled back gradually made me hyper-conscious of every physical action. Mentally, I learned not to take anything for granted, never mind the wisdom of staking one's ability to earn a living and even the definition of oneself on a fragile part of the body. With the benefit of hindsight, there's a couple of things I'd do differently. I pretty much spent every waking minute thinking about my face. Now that might have impacted the recovery, but I don't know. The cure for Bell's palsy really is just time, and perhaps that time would have been better spent on some other aspect of music while I was waiting for the muscle control to return. I'd also be less public about what I was going through. I posted my blog online every night. Well, that brought me support and encouragement literally from around the world, but bad news travels faster than good news. Some people no doubt made the assumption that I was permanently out of the game, and I'll never know how much work I lost as a result. People would come up to me even years later who I hadn't seen and say, "How are you?" In the years afterward, I'd find my blog reposted on various websites, and it read like the experience was still happening right now. So I rewrote it as a summation, and I asked people to post that instead. If you are currently going through Bell's palsy, or you know someone who is, get in touch with me and I'll send that blog to you. It's a worrisome time, and there's not a lot of information out there, especially as it relates to brass players. It's going to take patience and determination, but most people, like me, do recover completely, and you most likely will too. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.